Elliot, thank you for making the time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show.
So, we have a number of mutual friends, people like Sean Wells, AJ Yeager, and it's come up, your name has come up so much that I felt like I had to reach out, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Man, it's good to hear I'm being mentioned.
and
Happy to
and
jump
all in
on.
all in good ways, right? So it's some people get mentioned in not so good ways, but you have always come across as universally good. So let's I want to just dive into it with you if it's okay.
Yeah, please do.
So a number of people are listening to this and may have a certain stereotype about the idea of hypnosis.
Mm.
Perhaps it's from whatever Bugs Bunny commercial or cartoon that we had growing up or whatever. But if we can just lay the groundwork, and I apologize for really the elementary question here, but if we can lay the groundwork for people and sort of what is hypnosis and what it isn't, I would love to start there.
So I mean, the first thing is hypnotherapy, which is what I practice. Isn't what you would think of in terms of stage hypnosis or what you'd see on television. So the stage shows are sort of a clever effect that utilizes social pressure, hypnosis, and a very small percentage of the audience who are particularly suggestible. Hypnotherapy is much more like a guided meditation with a focus. So if you think about meditation, you're looking to clear your mind, and then as thoughts come in, you're sort of redirecting yourself back to your breath.
Mhm.
And that's the process of meditation, is you're taking control by not following the thought. With hypnotherapy, we get to the same trance-like state, deepened state, but instead we're looking to absolutely focus on one area. And typically it's an emotion. So anxiety. And we sort of dig in to this emotion of anxiety. And in that state, which there's nothing magic to, but the subconscious is dominant, it will start showing you where those issues came from. So you'll start having these memories start to appear and start to create a narrative as to why you're feeling that physical sensation of that emotion in your body. And then we look to reframe those emotions, adjust and change the memories so that the triggers are no longer there in your everyday life. So it's this process of discovery through almost a guided meditation process. So when people are like, oh, I can't be hypnotized, they're usually referencing, like they would never go on a stage and do a dance, which is personally, I never would. That's not
Yeah.
not something that would happen with me.
Neither would I.
Uh, um, However, when once it's framed as this is another form effectively of meditation,
Mhm.
but it's meditation with a purpose. Um, I think a lot of people can understand it differently when it's that. It's just a natural tool that we can use to hack into really like the DOS programming that's behind the Windows system. So talk therapy, a lot of the time you're hitting the things that are on the surface.
Yeah.
And with hypnotherapy, we're able to get more into the code and get an understanding of why those things are appearing on the surface.
Mhm. I want to take people through the process here in just a second, but I think I would love to just hear, how did you come into hypnotherapy? Because did you grow up saying like, "Hey, I want to be a hypnotherapist," or was there a couple of events in your life that you said, "This is what I want to do"?
Yeah, so certainly didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a hypnotherapist.
Mm,
That's for sure. So, like most people, I was skeptical of hypnotherapy,
mhm,
but I had a significant fear of flying. So, I would turn down long haul trips because I didn't want to be able to plane that long. And with sort of vacations, I'd be concerned 2 or 3 weeks before the trip. I'd spend the whole vacation on the beach worrying about the plane on the way back, and then I'd be worried again for when we booked the next holiday.
And so,
So
if you
it was
don't
like,
mind, Elliot, what does so I have gone through the fear of flying and been
mm,
forced to fly for an occupation before. I guess if we
mm.
can just set the stage for people, what was your occupation then? And then,
Oh,
what
so I
was,
was in so back in those days, I was in property, so I was in real estate, and then real estate investment, and then solar energy investment. So over that sort of time period, it was over a number of years. So I didn't need to fly for work. This was being offered opportunities which were friends going to the States and me turning down going on vacation with them, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, but it was a relatively big impact on my life. Someone recommended a hypnotherapist, and I thought went there skeptical, and she managed to resolve it in an hour, which is an extremely good
Wow.
result. But what was really interesting to me is, so I get into this very deep, relaxed state. Um, she asks me, when else have you felt this way? And I'm talking about turbulence on an airplane. And then we go even deeper, and I get to a memory in childhood where I'm a very small child at a grandfather's house, see a picture of a small plane, and I was told it crashed and killed his business partner.
Wow.
So, we bring up this memory, we rationalize through it through an adult perspective of that doesn't mean planes are dangerous, and I feel differently afterwards. But the reason it was particularly powerful for me was it wasn't a memory that I had any memories of, that I was aware of. And then I went home and I checked it with my mum next time I saw her, and she was like, yeah, that happened. So a memory I wasn't aware of that completely explained my fear of flying was brought up within this first session. And then I just felt differently about flying afterwards. And that played on my mind a lot. I was very interested by this, like suddenly my life has
Yeah.
changed and I can see the world. So I went and got trained as a hypnotherapist. And this is, I guess, 2009. So this is a couple of years after I'd actually had the experience. Um, and then I was expecting to do it as oh, one of my friends is scared of spiders, I'll fix them. Like, this is a fun thing to be able to do.
Hmm.
And then I just started helping people, and word of mouth grew, and someone else would ask me, and someone else would ask me. And it ended up turning into a business from that. And I ended up falling in love with the job and being, you know, the difference between doing investment type work and
Yeah.
helping people change their lives. The amount of satisfaction between the two is pretty substantial. Um, so
As a
yeah,
former banker, I can relate to
oh,
that
you
statement.
understand? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just completely different. So I got to spend my days doing something where I felt I was helping people, and it really just, the inertia just grew from there, and almost everything was word of mouth because, like you said, almost. I mean, everyone's skeptical of hypnotherapy and
Hmm.
hypnosis because of the way it's been portrayed by the media. So advertising doesn't really work.
Hmm.
So if you see a pop-up Facebook ad that says you're a CEO of a company, you should work with hypnotherapist Elliot Roe, the chance of you deciding to work with me, I would say, is very, very small. So my entire business was just built on friends recommending friends, and that's sort of gone on for a decade.
Hmm. Very, very cool. Uh, I would love to just get a sense of the experience. So if somebody is working with you, um, is it an hour? And if you don't mind just kind of taking us through the parts that they would go through, is it over, I guess during COVID, you have to kind of do things over Zoom, but do you typically do this in person, or how would you do a session?
So I do virtually all of my work over Zoom, and I
Hmm.
have done for the whole time.
Hmm.
Um, Most people are somewhere else in the country or they're international. I wouldn't be able to run my business based in a geographical location. And the great thing with hypnotherapy is it's audio. There's no swinging watch and things like that. Effectively, if you're in my office and I say, "Hey, close your eyes, take a deep breath," your eyes are closed and you're listening to me talk to you. It's actually no different from you being on Zoom wearing a headphones and I'm saying, "Close your eyes, take a deep breath." The whole process is an audio process. So I'm very fortunate there, that I work online, that I can work online. In terms of a first session would be an hour, would be 2 hours, and there would be around a 90 minutes of intake. So their background history, the different emotions they're struggling with. Usually there's some level of self-sabotage that we're covering, fear of failure, fear of success, some repeating pattern they're seeing in their life that they're reaching out to me for. So they're being destructive in relationships, they're having anger issues, their money keeps hitting a certain level and they can't get past it. So every time I get to $1 million in my business, we can't grow, whatever it might be. Typically though, the client has come to me because of that sort of issue.
Hmm.
Um, and then we work out what we feel is costing them the most, either financially or emotionally. And then we do the first hypnotherapy session on that area, and they're usually around 30 minutes, the actual hypnotherapy side. The beginning of it is an induction and a deepener. So think of this like the beginning of a headspace audio. Or we've got the app Prime Mind, which is the hypnotherapy app.
Hmm.
So be closing your eyes, taking a deep breath, going through a body scan, and then deepening that sensation and getting the person very, very focused in on themselves.
Hmm.
And then effectively going into their imagination. So the subconscious is then becoming dominant over the conscious mind. We're then exploring the emotions that they're struggling with. So every time I try and make the sales call I know I need to make, I feel a sickness in my stomach or a pressure. So we'll be using that as the starting point. So describe to me that feeling in your stomach. I feel a pressure, I feel a heat, I feel a tension, I just can't do it. And then I'll say, when else have you felt this way?
Mm-hmm.
And a memory will pop up in their mind. And they'll say, I'm 25 and this was happening. And then we'll go to another memory and another memory and we'll reach some kind of initial event that gives us a very good understanding of why a child would think that this is a significant issue.
Mm-hmm.
And effectively, what's happened is they've created a core program that was very useful for them when they were 3 to 7 years old,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still playing this in their 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going back to those early core memories and then reframing them. So look at this through your adult eyes. How do you view this? Now you see it rationally. Hugging the child, showing love, showing affection, just typical inner child work. And then as we do that within the hypnosis state, typically that creates a big emotional response. It's not rare for my clients to be crying during this period of the sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then as they come out of the session, oftentimes they'll notice the things that that triggered them previously
Mm-hmm.
don't trigger them in the same way. So the making the sales call might have been a 9 out of 10 pressure, and now it's a 5 out of 10 pressure. So it's now
Mm-hmm.
something they can do and they can get the practice in. And with the practice, it gets down to a 2 or a 3, and then
Mm-hmm.
they can function in that area. And there's a lot of other techniques that I'm using as well. There's parts therapy, there's different types of timeline therapy within it, some NLP techniques. However, the basis of the majority of my work is understanding why someone is behaving in the way they are. Because anytime you're doing something illogical, your subconscious actually has a reason for it. It's not random.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the work.
So a lot there, Elliot, and
Yeah,
uh,
sorry.
we really want to unpack some of it at least today.
Right.
So let's take for instance, and I wouldn't say I've come to a resolution with this, but but it certainly diminished a lot since I've uh, at least recently. But like public speaking is a very common fear that people
Mm,
have, right? And as we're going through uncovering the story as to why that is, you hinted at something about events between the age of 3 and 7.
mm.
Why is 3 and 7 significant here, or is that just an example? Like, could this be precognitive even? So, like before you're in the womb.
Potentially, it could be precognitive. Typically, where I see the big change happening is during those years,
Mm-hmm.
and this is when our brains are developing and we're creating our framework for living. So during those years, if we think of from an evolutionary perspective, the
Mm-hmm.
child is learning to live in the environment that that particular child is being brought into,
Yeah.
and a child is not innately afraid of a tiger,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if the
Yeah.
mum sees a tiger, the mum is going to scream. And from that point forward, the child will say, look, and they look at the tiger, they'll have an adrenaline response because they know that it's something they're supposed to be scared of.
Yeah.
So there's a period in our life where our programming is very malleable.
Mm-hmm.
And effectively, that's where we see the majority of these inefficient programs have been created. Because from an evolutionary perspective, it was incredibly useful 20,000, 30,000 years ago, and not so useful in the last 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we see those areas. Now these issues can be created later in life, but oftentimes that's with very severe trauma.
Mm.
So PTSD type issues are effectively something getting into the programming, but at a later stage, and that's why they're so impactful. But typically, the things that impact you in later life are impacting you because you've created some kind of initial sensitizing event, some kind of trigger previous to that that makes it scary. So having it having a spider thrown in your hair isn't necessarily scary. It could be something you laugh at. However, if your mom was screaming whenever she saw a spider, having a spider thrown into your hair is terrifying for you. So we're looking at really, it's typically those sorts of ages, sometimes up to the age of 10, where we see the sort of the very interesting situations, but it's rarely much later than that that I see as the initial starting point. Typically, the starting point is somewhere through childhood, and oftentimes, realistically, an awful lot of it is linked to just self-worth and self-love.
Mm-hmm.
So, public speaking, you're putting yourself out there to be judged by your peers. That will go back to, sometimes it goes back to public speaking memories of, I was 5 years old, I was giving a talk at kindergarten and this happened. But also, oftentimes, it can go back to parents being very critical of the young child. So feeling that they're not good enough, they're not loved, they're not intelligent. And now in a public speaking position, you have to go out and you have to put yourself out to the judgment of society. And
Mm-hmm.
again, from an evolutionary perspective, living in tribes, putting yourself to the judgment of your peers is a very scary thing, a very dangerous thing historically as well. Um, so that's the sort of thing. I mean, effectively, everything usually comes down to love and self-worth. Am I lovable? Am I enough? Am I good enough? And what made you not feel those ways as a child?
There seems to be a correlation here with also just general ego development, right? So when I've heard it, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but like I've heard it said that like the ego tends to develop towards the tail end of these ages.
Hmm.
Is there a general correlation? I mean, because these things get seeded almost pre-ego, and then the ego develops around it, and is that kind of the reason why it's subconscious in many ways?
Yeah, it seems that these programs are locked in place before that development. It
Hmm.
seems to be the case. So we're running these again. This I really like the analogy of a computer. It's like the core programming of the rules,
Hmm.
and these rules are running, and then sort of how we learn to live in life um, is sort of overlaid on top of that. But there's a core basis of rules that, in most cases, your subconscious is trying to just keep you safe and keep you alive. So the person who, when they feel in any way offended or threatened, gets extraordinarily angry, probably they've seen that somewhere in their childhood as an effective way for them to stay safe. Someone who gets particularly anxious and hides away, same thing. They've seen it somewhere as an effective way for them to maintain safety. And all it is we have this core overriding program that says, trigger happened, this is what Boomer has to do.
Hmm.
And you just find yourself doing it, and you feel the physical response. And that's really where we have the root into it, is because if you're having a physical sensation from a trigger as an adult, there's a subconscious reason why. And that's our entry point from hypnotherapy.
Fascinating. Now, during the course of these sessions with people, is there, you mentioned earlier that sometimes, or actually in your own experience, that fear of flying almost went away or was diminished in a first
Mm.
session. How quick is it, or is it the case that everybody is individual and may take multiple sessions depending on the situation?
So I was very fortunate. I think I had an extremely fortunate first session, which is what threw me into this direction in
Hmm.
life. There's usually change after a first session, like that's normal. There's some percentage tone down of the emotion, and then it just depends if the person wants to keep working in that area. So let's say with my fear of flying, it didn't go from a 10 to a 0. It went from a 10, well, probably a 9. I guess 10 means I would never have gone on a plane. I did get on them sometimes. Probably went from a 9 to a 5. And the 5 meant I was happy to book vacations and happy to get on planes. And then the getting on planes and getting used to it made it much lower again. And, if I'm on a plane and there's crazy turbulence, I'm still not going to be 100% comfortable, but I'm not going to be 100% comfortable in the way that most people on the plane aren't 100% comfortable,
Hmm.
rather than on a smooth flight feeling like other people in turbulence. Um, and it's sort of that expectation of there will be some change typically very early on, and then it just depends how deep you want to go. Like, how much of an issue is this? Now, the work I'm doing with executives, CEOs, founders of companies, those sorts of people, this is much more fine tuning. So they're
Hmm.
not coming to me with a crisis. Oftentimes they're saying, hey, things are going great. We're being really successful. However, I noticed this subtle block in this area, but this subtle block is costing us X million dollars. And if I could just change this one way I'm dealing with this situation, um, this changes our business, or this changes my personal life, or my relationship with my wife, or whatever it might be. Now, that's usually because it's more subtle, it's sometimes harder to get the same level of change, because my subconscious knew exactly where the fear of flying was coming from because it was turned up to a 10 or 9 or whatever we're calling it. So there's a huge physical response. So it threw up the memory straight away. It's like, this is coming from here. This is why planes are dangerous. When it's more subtle, typically I generally work with people for 10 sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's usually plenty of things for us to cover over those 10 sessions. That would be normal. 10 sessions over around 6 months.
And if I were to compare this with something like meditation, which would take, I mean, in my case, it's like a years of doing it to get similar effects. The effect that you get, the result that you get is incredibly quick. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would expect most people after their first session to be saying things have started to change.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very fast because you're being guided to the places you don't want to go. So with meditation, you still have to overcome the fact that you have blind spots, and your mind typically doesn't want to go to those places, and we hide them away. And that's where, with hypnotherapy, having someone take you through this process and helping you bring up the things that happened in your childhood that you don't like thinking about, and reframing them into a way that those things are tolerable to think about, to work, to feel, and have those feelings of stress diminish from them, is just, I believe, a faster process to getting to that. But things like meditation are incredibly powerful, and other types of therapies. This is just the modality that I predominantly use as a performance coach, because I found it to be the most effective,
Mm-hmm.
for my personality type to work with people.
Fascinating. All right. So, want to get into a little bit more in terms of, I guess, use cases in this case,
Mm,
but also talking about some of your past experiences. We have a mutual friend, Fedor,
mm,
who has done quite well in the poker world. Let's say
yeah.
that. Uh, I know if you're willing to share, he has worked with you in the past, and just what does that look like from, I mean, he's an incredibly smart person.
Mm.
He came to you and just what did that process look like with Fedor?
So I mean, with Fedor, for people who don't know, he's one of the world's best poker, known as one of the world's best poker players now. He started working with me before he had that run of success. So we started working together around some self-sabotage issues, and all of this is public. We've spoken about it on podcasts, and that's why I can discuss what's been discussed already. So he was noticing that he wasn't getting the results that he believed he should be attaining in poker, and that, again, it was this subtle, I feel like something's holding me back, but I'm not sure what's holding me back. However, if I overcome this, it's going to lead to an awful lot of success. So we're looking in those moments to anywhere where a lack of there's something that just doesn't quite make sense as they're talking through their processes, when they're talking about their emotions at final tables. And then as we discuss these topics in depth, there will just be clear signs of an area that isn't quite as rational as other areas. And then once again, we'll be doing the hypnotherapy on those particular topics, to try and understand why the self-sabotage behavior is in place. So in his case, there was some self-sabotage behavior that was holding him back from really fully realizing his potential. So we were really fortunate. We went from a situation where he hadn't won any major live tournament, and he won everything for around 2 years. And I think he's cashed $30 million since we started that process of working on these. And he's kind enough to put a lot of, some of that success down to the work that we did on overcoming these sabotage behaviors. And they're not the sort of sabotage we're talking about in people that are world class, are very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't these people are destroying their lives, they're doing some crazy behavior. It's this subtle, hey, this just doesn't quite make sense. If we can refine this, I sort of visualize it in my mind of, like, we all start as a cube, and as we do the emotional work, we're rounding the edges and rounding the edges and rounding the edges until we're trying to turn into a ball. And these people who come to me, they're already extraordinarily successful. I'm not getting any cubes come to me. I'm getting people who are like, it's a slightly uncircular ball, but the difference from sanding off that final bit of emotional edge suddenly means they can roll smoothly, and then crazy things happen. I mean, I've had unbelievable success in poker. It's been way over $100 million my clients have won. I've had people break records in sports. I've had people win UFC championships. I've had traders become some of the top traders in America. And I really just do feel that it's when the potential's there, if you can smooth off that final rough patch, then life just gets an awful lot easier.
It's and just I think Fedor's now won what, two World Series of Poker championships, or is it?
Oh no, so he's trying to think. So he's got one bracelet, but I mean he won all of the high roller tournaments. Like
Mhm.
he won just he went on a year and he just decimated the field for a couple of years and then retired from full-time poker and focused more on business now.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that was an exceptionally fun one to be working on, and really had a huge impact on my career. We went through that process, and like I said, he was very generous in the way that he talked about the work we'd done, and he wanted us to share that with more people. And he helped back an app that I created, a hypnotherapy app, Prime Mind,
Mhm.
so that effectively more people could try hypnosis, and purely down to the success he had had, and he wanted more people to have access to it. So we have Prime Mind on the iTunes store and Google Play.
So let's go a little bit into Prime Mind, and then I want to come
Mm.
back over into that executive crowd. So I've had a subscription to Prime Mind basically, I think, since you guys have launched it. But
Oh wow.
and it's been a useful tool for me, and it's been interesting to see the development over the years. Now, Prime Mind, just to set it up for people, are they? I believe it's all like close to 20 minutes in terms of different hypnotherapy experiences.
Yeah, so there's around, I think there are 40 free audios in the app if you just sign up and download it, and then if you like pay for the upside, it's like this the upgrade, there's 300 audios, something like that. And they're all hypnotherapy suggestion audios. Obviously it's only me speaking, the person can't speak back, it's an app. But it's suggestion audios to try and use visualization to prepare yourself in a specific area of life. So there are public speaking audios, there's doing a sales call, there's going to sleep at night, there's courses to work on your confidence, on winner's mindset, on dealing with relationship issues, on forgiving people. So it's like a short, I think they start at 15 minutes up to about 25, 30 minutes
Mhm.
audio program, all with a very specific topic. So the idea is you're priming yourself for a certain thing that you want to resolve. It differs slightly from meditation, which is usually more, meditation as a focus exercise rather than this is hypnotherapy. So it's, like I said, meditation with a purpose is a good way to describe it.
Mhm. And you didn't ask me to cue this beforehand. In fact, I haven't told you this yet, but I gave a TED talk about 2 years ago now, and it was TEDx. And I think at that point I was listening to the public speaking one on almost repeat every single day, and just the prep work.
Awesome. That's really cool, man.
Yeah, it's and again, public speaking for me has been one of those, and I'm sure if I were to work with you one on one, you'd uncover something that's happened between me and probably my father when I was
Mm.
younger, that I don't even recognize today. But I would say in the lead up to that event, it was incredibly helpful. So thank you.
Oh, that's well. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for giving it a try. And that's literally what made the app for. Is there's these stories out there that I never hear, where
Mhm.
it's like someone's performed better at a certain event because they put in the time with the app. So that's really awesome.
Let's go back to the executive crowd,
Mm.
because that's the majority of the people listening to this show right now. What are some of the typical things? And you mentioned these subtle bumps, right? And
Mm.
sort of the rounding of the sphere. But what are some of those subtle bumps that come up? Is it just sales calls? Is it public speaking? Is there a common theme to those subtle bumps?
Um, I mean, it shows up differently for different founders, different executives. But there are certainly some themes I see with founders. A lot of insecurity comes up in investment rounds.
Mm-hmm.
So looking for funding, that that creates a lot of anxiety, and it creates a lot of meetings that are suboptimal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one stage where a lot of them will come to me. They're saying, "Hey, we're looking to do our next series. I'm having these emotions come up when I'm having my investor meetings. I know that I'm not performing to my best." So that's a common theme. Staff retention is something that's very significant. So an understanding of how to communicate and why they're communicating poorly with their staff. So another time, like if someone's noticing that they're losing good staff frequently, they'll reach out to me. And then there's the sort of the fears around growth. There are a lot of people who have a subconscious fear of being extraordinarily successful,
Mm-hmm.
and they create a level of wealth that they feel comfortable with, and then they can't move past that because of something that they've learned. Um, and a lot of the time it's quite round numbers. For some people it's 100,000, for some it's quarter of a million, half a million. I've seen it up to tens of millions, and then someone hits just a point of like, no, past this is unacceptable. And what will happen is they'll bring themselves back to this level over and over again over multiple years, and they'll be coming to me saying, "Hey, like I know I'm stuck on this number, and there's no logical reason why my business has stopped growing. Like we've hit $1 million profit every year for the last 4 years, and there's no reason why our business shouldn't be growing past this. But every time it starts to go above, I find a way of getting rid of the money, investing poorly, whatever it might be." Um, and then we're working through these issues around typically guilt and shame around wealth,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at that. And then I guess the final one is the people not giving 100% because it protects their ego.
Mm-hmm.
So they have all of these ideas, they know what would grow their business best, but then they find themselves not doing it. And it tends to show up as this ego protection of they're doing well enough, but they're not doing extraordinarily. But if they try, they might fail, and that will make them feel bad. But if they don't try, they can tell themselves, I could have tried and I would have made $100 million, but I just wasn't able to. I just chose not to try. So they've maintained control. And that kind of ego protection shows up for lots of people in lots of ways. And, the thing that usually comes up is clever kid in school doesn't have to study for exams to get good grades. The exams start to get harder. The kid still doesn't study because it's much more comfortable getting a B with no work put in than putting in the work and then not getting the A,
Mm-hmm.
because they can sort of tell themselves that, hey, if I'd tried, I would have got the best score, but I'm not sort of putting myself in the game. So you're removing the emotional risk of no longer seeing yourself as intelligent, and it's just that playing out through the business life.
What percentage of these guys come or women come to you as sort of fear of failure versus fear of success? Or is it usually mixing
Well,
both?
I believe they're almost always intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of success and fear of failure. Um, However someone defines it, usually when we dig into it, there's some facet of both is showing itself. It's hard to describe, but they sound complete opposites, but they're actually very close when you start digging in.
A couple of terms that have come up quite a bit in this conversation, and with regards to when you're working with these types of people, two things that came up were early child work and then timeline therapy. uh, if you're willing to explain it, what would be the difference between those two?
So I mean, the way that I mean, I see them as very close,
Hmm.
actually, because we're doing a version of timeline therapy to bring up the inner child, the early child work, where what I do is slightly different. Is I mix that in. Then my inner child work, I also mix in with parts therapy, which is seeing the part of yourself, that seeing yourself as separate parts. Um, Sort of seeing the issue as a part of yourself rather than as yourself, separating it out, and then going into the childhood memories and understanding that that part can be changed if you adjust the memories. I'm probably not describing this as succinctly as I could, but effectively, what I look to do is we'll look through the timeline. We'll find the different keystone memories that you need to work through. We'll go into those memories and change them, like I was describing, but we'll also be looking at the part of the self who is a representation of these issues. So the anxious part of you, what does the anxious part of you look like? The part of you that comes out when you think about public speaking. Within a hypnotherapy session, when you're in that altered state, you'll be describing that as he's frail, he's young, he's weak, he's shaking, whatever it might be. Okay, where did this part of you come from? When did you learn that behavior? It'll bring up another memory. We'll then adjust those memories and we'll go back to that part and we'll see how that part of you has changed. And typically, that part of you will look completely different. So he's standing tall, he's stronger. And what's happening is, as you're changing the information in the memories, you're changing the way the client visualizes their subconscious. And by making that change, they see their subconscious changing. It's no longer speaking to them in the same way that it was before. It shows us that the trigger has changed, and then we're sort of releasing and working through that. So I'm doing sort of a combination of multiple therapies within the session,
Mhm.
but effectively all doing the same thing, which is just trying to change the deeper program that the client's struggling with, that's just been repeating for those years.
Those people who are thinking back to like when they were 7 or 4 and not drawing up any memories, is that going to be an issue in session, or does the fact that they're in, I guess, trance or whatever the state is, does that help them bring out these events in their mind?
Yeah, so you definitely, things come up, just like I said with my situation with the flight. um, I wasn't consciously aware of the memory that was there. If she had asked me, why do you think you're scared of flying? There is 0% chance that I would have come up with that particular situation. So when you're in this very deep, very focused state, you just have more access than you would have in a normal conversation. Um, we also you need to be aware that if you're having a very strong emotional response to something, your subconscious knows why it's having the very strong emotional response to something. So, if you're coming with a fear that's a 9 or a 10, the memories, even if you're not consciously aware of them, they will show themselves up as we start exploring those, because um, otherwise you wouldn't have the fear at that level. It would be a subtle discomfort if you were unaware. But if it's something that's really holding you back from living your life, your subconscious knows the reason. Like, these things just pop up, they just come out very easily. And again, obviously it differs client to client. Sometimes it takes a few sessions, but the typical response is, the bigger the emotion that someone's coming with, the easier it is to find the root cause of that emotion.
Elliot, this has been amazing. And I think I could ask questions of you for hours and hours, but I want to be cognizant of your time. Uh,
Yeah.
I want to round off with just a final few questions here.
Yeah, of course.
Focus for you when you need to really dig into something and perhaps get into a flow state. Is it easy, or do you have tools that you use? And if so, what are those tools?
It's sort of, what I'm trying to say is, it's not easy, but it's pre-planned in the way that I structure my entire week.
Mm.
So on a daily basis, I utilize a sauna in the mornings. I work out with a trainer 5 days a week. I have a massage once a week. I see a hypnotherapist every 2 weeks. I see a business coach once a month. I go to an energy worker once a month, and I have assisted stretching. So it's quite easy for me to get into those states, but it's easy because I'm putting hours and hours a week into
Yeah.
making it easy.
Yeah.
So it's this sort of, it's easy, but it's easy because of the effort that's put in. And I guess therefore it's a lot of effort to be able to get myself into that state. But I find that it pays off. All of those things are an investment for me that allow me to have more emotional control and more focus control when needed.
As a performance coach, what
Mm.
excites you most about the world we live in right now when it comes to the performance aspect of things?
Um, I think it's people realizing that this is sort of untapped to some extent. So a lot of people who are coming to me, they're exploring a lot of options now. So everyone's a biohacker to some extent. but it's all opening up. So if we think back to the early 2000s, the options for optimization were just so completely different to now. I mean, I'm talking to you as a hypnotherapist who works with high performers. Like, I doubt there were very many people doing this in the world 20 years ago, even now that there really aren't. And for me, it's just seeing this new wave of a generation of people who are just like, I want to see what happens if I get my mind in the best possible state and my body in the best possible state, and I'm resting properly and I'm sleeping well and I'm building good relationships. So I guess my excitement isn't around whether someone's going to win an Olympic medal. It's this movement towards like better living. Really, even the optimization side is the happiness side that it brings is more important to me than the true just net performance. It's seeing that if you get all of these things right, you live a happier life, and happier lives tend to lead to better performances in every area. So yeah, it's like sort of that theme is what's exciting for me.
Book which has most impacted you and how you show up in your life.
Ooh.
And for the record, I didn't send you any of these questions
So yeah,
beforehand, so I'm putting you on the
yeah,
spot.
give me some. Yeah, just trying to think. There's lots of good books. Mm,
You can
I
go
think
with more than one.
the one that was most useful for me in working with poker players, and sort of a thought process around mindset for performance, was The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin.
Mhm.
I found that a really powerful book. I found it interesting seeing a lot of the things I was doing were shown in the book, but there's this subtlety of this idea that, and if anyone knows the story of Josh, he was a world-class chess player and then he became a world champion in martial arts. And where it was interesting to me was it was showing me what I was seeing in my own it was seeing me sort of in my own work, where it doesn't really matter the thing that people are doing. There's a process to high performance using mindfulness and pre-planning and strategies that will allow you to perform at the top level of anything. So my sessions with UFC fighters aren't dramatically different to my sessions with CEOs or crypto traders or poker players or Olympic athletes. Um, and that's sort of what I sort of felt that theme from that book, and I found that really interesting. I always talk about this book. I love the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, Growth
Mhm.
versus Fixed Mindsets. Um, so useful to so many of my clients, and even in the way we raise our children. But I think that's a really good book if you haven't read it.
Elliot, where can people find out more about you? And if they want to work with you, how do they get in touch?
So I have a website, elliotroe.com, if you're looking for coaching with me or someone who I've trained. And then Primed Mind, the app that I was talking about. If you go to primemind.com, or if you look it up on the App Store, you can download that. And then we also have a podcast on the Primed Mind website as well, where we talk to high performers about these types of subjects.
Elliot, like I said before, we have a lot of mutual friends, and this is a conversation that has been a long time coming. I hope it's the first of many, but thank you again for taking the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Man, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. To all the superhumans listening out there, have an absolutely epic day.